runs the
Do I do
next.
that? Okay.
So if you'll
Okay, so I make Nicole the host now. Thank you,
Right.
everyone who listened.
Thank you, Amy.
Did Amy? That was lovely.
Let's
And
see.
thank you, Amy.
Okay. Now I switch it to speaker view.
Yes.
Yes,
Perfect.
thank you.
So am
And
I the host now?
Yep.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. I have been loving this so far. It's been so much fun to listen to everybody. So I am on for reading, and I have two books actually coming on. I finally confessed to the other one yesterday. So I was going to read, planning to read Tempted. If I have time, I might read a little kind of a fun romantic snippet from Unintended. We'll see how it goes. But a little background on Tempted. Elizabeth, she's from America. This is the year 1900. She leaves under some pretty dire circumstances. Richard Fitzwilliam steps in to help her out by basically saving her reputation, marrying her, that sort of thing. I did give a little spoiler away, but probably not that big a one in light of our conversation about tropes. So anyway, here she's been. At this point, we're going to read chapter 17. She's been in England for a little while. She and Darcy have actually kind of become friends. He's trusting her and respecting her, but the rest of the family is still kind of keeping her at a distance, except for our little sovereign character here. We have Sheila. I don't even know how you pronounce her name. This is terrible. Maxan. She is our cameo. She plays the Duchess. Countess of Matlock. Anyway. Oh, come on. Oh, come on. Just a second, Jenna. Anyway, so just a little background. This is the first time she meets the Matlocks. So she's finally come to the estate. She's really nervous. Richard's mom has been really standoffish. So here we go. Reginald Fitzwilliam, 9th Earl of Matlock. By the way, this is Richard's brother, not his father, because his father has died. Barely resembled his younger brother. Slightly balding, several inches shorter, and with a far thicker girth, Elizabeth could have believed she was meeting Richard's father instead of a brother who was only 5 years older. He bowed cordially, not nearly so stiffly as Mr. Darcy once had, but neither did he possess about his bearing or expression the hint that his manner would alter significantly upon further acquaintance. "Welcome to Matlock, Mrs. Fitzwilliam," he greeted her. "And Miss Bennet, a pleasure indeed." There, the Countess dismissed her husband with a flippant wave of her hand. Sorry, I am not a professional narrator here. Now we have got the formalities out of the way, come warm up your toes. You must be chilled to the bone after that carriage ride. "Oh, not at all, Lady Matlock," Elizabeth protested. "Mr. Darcy had plenty of hot bricks in the coach." The truth was that most of those had been claimed by Georgiana when they first set out, but Mr. Darcy had made some odd remark about artificial dignity, and the bricks had been redistributed. Elizabeth and Jane followed the Countess in awe as she swept them into the bowels of the great house. For a fleeting instant, Elizabeth wondered why Billy had not been bouncing on the front steps to welcome them, but they soon found that this had been the Countess's design, for he was waiting for them in the drawing room. Miss de Bourgh was there too, seated on a gilded stool with a great ostrich fan in her hand and cocking a saucy eye at the new entrance to the room. Once Elizabeth had rounded the corner, she finally saw what the whole affair was about. For a photographer was just unpacking his equipment. "A little surprise for you all," the Countess crowed in pleasure. "Darcy, I knew you would not have thought to have it done, and like as not would have found some excuse to avoid it all if I had warned you about it. However, you and Anne absolutely must take an engagement photograph before you sail for South Africa. I will expect a note of gratitude for seeing to the arrangements, of course." Elizabeth looked back at Mr. Darcy, but no hint of surprise or humor, in fact, no expression of any kind flashed across his features. He merely nodded and adjusted his cufflinks. Georgiana left his side to seat herself in another corner, trying to vanish from the general assemblage. "Lizzie, Jane," Billy whispered loudly. "I'm sorry." Waving him over to sit beside him on the sofa. "Sorry about that. You will never guess. Why, to be sure, I am all astonishment myself." Jane narrowed her eyes. "Billy, have you developed an accent?" His face clouded. "Accent? Of course not. How silly. I've always talked like this." "Jane's right," Elizabeth agreed. "You sound different." Billy's cheeks reddened and he glanced around. "Don't embarrass me, Lizzie," he pleaded. "I don't want to sound like a hayseed around." "Anne, dear," the Countess was calling, "are you quite ready? Darcy, you must sit here and look. Here's a walking stick for you to hold and a monocle to wear during the photograph." "I do not use a monocle," Mr. Darcy protested. "What does that matter? Makes you look more sophisticated," the Countess decided. Now take Anne's hand and turn just, no, you may not simply hold the monocle, Darcy. You must place it on your eye. I will do no such thing, was his obstinate reply. How can you be so tiresome? Well, discard it if you must, but I insist on the walking stick. Elizabeth covered her mouth with her hand and snickered, a little too loudly, for Mr. Darcy himself looked up and caught her gaze. Feeling impish, she adopted a stuffy air and held her finger up under her nose, in reminiscence of that time she had mocked him for his mustache. He broke into a broad grin. Oh, no, Darcy, the Countess admonished. Have you no decency? Come now, you cannot smile for your engagement portrait, and lend me some support here. You may as well surrender, Darcy, the Earl laughed from the far side of the room. My dear, you ought to have him stand behind her. That is the way all the family portraits are done. Very well, the lady conceded, but you must place your hand on her shoulder, Darcy, and yes, you rest your hand upon his and look up. Elizabeth's eyelid was twitching, and she could not decide why. But somewhere in the middle of watching Mr. Darcy taking his place beside his betrothed, her own smile had grown cold. She dropped any attempt at a cheerful expression because Jane was already looking at her curiously, and she sensed her teeth baring in a grimace rather than congratulations. She looked down at her lap and adjusted her skirts. It was easier than watching the way Anne de Bourgh was gazing up into Mr. Darcy's eyes and he down into hers. Elizabeth kept her gaze fixed on her hands until the explosion of the photographer's flash declared it safe for her to do otherwise. Now it is our turn, Billy said. Wait, what did you say? Elizabeth's head whirled about as her cousin bounced out of his seat and beckoned to her. That was the rest of the surprise, Lady Matlock informed her. The photographer was already coming, and I thought, how delightful for your family to have your portrait. Do you not agree? Oh, Jane's eyes filled, and she put her fingers to her lips. I wish I had one of them. It is ever so kind of you, Lady Matlock. I know it is, my dear, the Countess agreed warmly. Come, you and Elizabeth must sit here, and we will have Mr. Collins just behind you where Darcy was. Collins, I know you will not object to the monocle. If your ladyship recommends it, he submitted, but Elizabeth saw a flush of pride staining his face. The photographer solemnly raised his flash lamp and commanded, hold. A few moments later, dazed and blinded, she started to rise from the couch. Billy was profusely thanking the Countess, the photographer, Miss de Bourgh, and likely would have thanked the maids and the footman if Mr. Darcy had not stopped him. Have you another plate? He asked of the photographer. Indeed, sir. Very good. Mrs. Fitzwilliam, will you consent to one more photograph? Elizabeth tried frantically to blink the white light from her eyes. Another? Of course. I thought perhaps Richard would like to have it when we find him. The Earl and Countess praised this notion, and everyone else in the room seemed to approve as well. But Elizabeth's dazzled eyes had dimmed enough for her to make out Mr. Darcy's expression. Something was missing from his face and his tone. Something wistful, something warm, something that had always been there before. And I'm coming to a scene break. Okay, I have 20 minutes left, so I think we have time for just the sweet parts here. I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit. Darcy, Reginald interrupted his thoughts, did you desire that drink in my study? He glanced at his cousin. Indeed, a moment, if you please. Elizabeth had looked his way at hearing him speak, so he took an opportunity to step close, as if telling her something important while the others were engaged in admiring the lavish chimney piece. She inclined her ear. You're looking very well today, Elizabeth, he murmured softly. She straightened and regarded him strangely. After a slight hesitation, she whispered back, why are you saying this? Because you look as though you do not believe it. I wish to make you more comfortable, to help you understand that you belong. Her lashes lowered. I doubt I shall ever belong, but it was kind of you to try. I thank you for the thought, but you needn't invent compliments merely to settle my nerves. I invented nothing. She looked earnestly back up to him, her eyes full of longing and question. He fought a smile. Everyone would notice what he was about if he followed his inclinations and began to laugh or speak with a volume that matched the strength of his sincerity. Instead, he leaned fractionally closer. I meant every word and then some. You look beautiful today, Elizabeth, as you always do. Matlock will be a finer house with you as its guest. The look that came over her face was some combination of abashed pleasure and petrified amazement as she stared back at him. A few flutters of her lashes, an almost fearful smile, were to be his only answer. Enjoy the rest of your tour, he said in a more regular tone. We will see you at tea. Reginald? Now, I'm actually going to skip forward just a little bit more. And hang on a second here. Okay. And here we have Darcy and Elizabeth at home. They're back at Pemberley. They were just there at Matlock for quite a short little visit, and I think this will probably use up our time. It was quite late when the party from Pemberley returned. Georgiana disappeared into her rooms, having spoken hardly more than a dozen words to anyone all day. Darcy watched her go in some chagrin. He would need to speak with her again before he departed for London, but he was beginning to fear his own interference might do more harm than good. Each time he had admonished her to improve her manner toward their guests, she withdrew even more. It was no good asking help of the Countess, but perhaps Anne might be a voice Georgiana would heed. Anne. He had nearly forgotten her several times that day. Whether she'd been in another room or seated beside him, so often he found his thoughts drifting in another direction, only to be brought crashing back to earth with the reminder of her presence. If Anne had been offensive, rude, or even withdrawn like Georgiana, he could almost excuse himself for his absent-mindedness, but she had not. Rather, she had been friendly with both Elizabeth and her sister, charming with the Dowager and the Countess, and even tolerant of that foolish Collins fellow. To himself, she had said little, but what did he expect her to say? Theirs was a relationship that required no polite chatter. They were no longer trying to acquaint themselves with each other, and they had the freedom of occasional privacy, should they require deeper conversation. Yet, despite so many opportunities that day, they had never gone off by themselves for any reason, certainly not to exchange clandestine caresses or improprieties, not even to discuss plans for their wedding or argue about how long he would be away. Miss Bennet curtsied very prettily to him in the hall after the footman had removed her wrap. "Mr. Darcy," she said, "I want to thank you for such a lovely day. It was most kind of you to arrange the outing for us." "You are quite welcome, Miss Bennet," he replied. The lady turned, with a faint question in her eyes, for her sister, but she went quietly up the stair. Elizabeth remained, watching after her. "I would have to echo the sentiment," she told him. "Today was a relief." "A relief? How so?" He extended his hand as she spoke, inviting her to a sitting room for a few moments before she retired. She followed without hesitation. "Only that I had fretted over it so long. I had wondered before why I was never invited to Matlock, despite the Countess's apparent welcome. I assumed I was a scandal or a disappointment." "Elizabeth." He sat in the chair opposite hers and leaned forward. "I hope you will never fear that again. Whoever else she is, and she is a great deal, the Dowager is also a grieving mother and a fairly recent widow." "I know." She turned her chin to the side and stroked one satin glove over the other. "I ought not to have spoken as I did. It was wrong of me." "You won her over, though." She chuckled, shy pleasure evident in her cheeks. "I still cannot believe she did not cast me out of the house." "No," he laughed. "I rather wondered if it would go as it did, for I remember my aunt in better days. She was always one to say or do something to cause whispers. It was she who managed the estate and the family coffers, you know. It was she who arranged that marriage between Reginald and Sheila, not her husband. And it was she who first made the suggestion that I could do something to protect Richard from being sent off to war. That was what sent him to Wyoming in the first place." Elizabeth's eyes darkened. "I do not understand. What influence did you have?" "The horses, of course. I was one of the investors, and General Houghton, who oversees the horse buyers, is an old friend. I asked for Richard to be stationed." "Elizabeth?" She got hastily to her feet and began pacing the room. "You? It was you who contracted with the local outfit?" "Well, not me personally, no. A representative hired the outfit, but we financed the affair, myself and others." "But you were responsible. Responsible for what?" he asked. "Well, for all of it, for the Brysons' wealth and my father's long, hard days shoeing remounts, and for Richard coming all that way just to drag innocent animals off to war." "Elizabeth." He rose to meet her and caught her fretful hand, stilling her and forcing her to look at him. "If I have done wrong, I am perfectly ignorant of how. It was a service to my country and no small service to my family. You could not hold me accountable for every unseen result of it." "But the results were not unseen, were they?" she retorted. "You did not know what came of my town, the people there, as a consequence of your investment. I was told it was a boon for the local economy, that no town would have existed at all, and that the rail scarcely even stopped there before. Is that not true?" Her ire seemed to wear out. She shook her head with a mild snort and let her hands fall from his, then slowly sank back into her seat. "I suppose it is true, but it does not follow that everything your soldiers brought was good." "What is that supposed to mean? Do you mean to say they conducted themselves ill?" specifically, not most of them. It was others who were raised above what might be considered just. Her brow pinched and she shook her head. Please, I do not wish to discuss it. He sighed and gazed at the floor. They were silent some minutes and each began to fidget until Darcy thought she looked as though she would go. This is not how I was hoping our last conversation would proceed, he said at last. Last conversation? But you do not leave for London for 2 more days. Yes, and during those days, I will be thoroughly occupied with other matters. Even if I do have a minute or two here and there, I do not expect the pleasure of private conversation. Matters may change for you as well, for now that you have been introduced to the Dowager and the Earl, you may be spending more time at Matlock or entertaining them here. She toyed with the fingers of her gloves, not meeting his eye. I would not be surprised, he continued, if they invite you to remove to Matlock while I'm away. Would you like that, sir? She murmured. Why would you ask that? She shook her head and her hand made a slight gesture of uncertainty. Well, he replied, to answer your question, yes, I would be pleased because the family's welcome and acceptance of you can only improve your prospects. If you think I would not be sorry to see you go. She raised her head and watched him. I would, he finished in a husky voice, but I would not stand in the way of your pleasure. She smiled, but it did not touch her eyes. You have been exceedingly kind, William. My sister and I, we appreciate it more than you can know. About her, I had a letter from my friend Bingley just the other day. He proposed coming north later this month on business and asked if he might call. I will be sorry to miss him, but I did reply that he was welcome to break his journey here, or to stay on for as long as he chose. But if it would be inadvisable, I could always call him off. She stroked one satin glove over the other, a warm blush staining her cheeks. I believe my sister would be pleased to meet him again. And what of you? She rolled her head upright once more, her gaze focused on his face. What about me? What are your expectations while I'm away? She swallowed and her eyes drifted up and to the left. I'm just waiting, hoping there's nothing else I can do. Darcy froze and frowned and nodded slowly. Yes, I pray to have some word, something at least we can be sure of. This not knowing is enough to drive one mad. Her look had wandered, far away and dreamlike were her eyes as her lips flickered into something like a smile of agreement. He watched her for a moment, the soft breath rising her bosom, the faintest reddish highlights in her hair catching the glow from the fire, the way her throat trembled. Heat spread across his core, a tenderness he ached to express. An image lanced unbidden through his thoughts, tracing her velvet cheek with his own, counting each sweet freckle with his lips, and testing the softness of her hair between his fingers. His heart gave a great seizure, and he clasped his hand over his eyes. Good God, it was not blasphemy, for he truly would need divine help to take captive each wayward thought where she was concerned. His sudden lurch had drawn her notice, and she stretched and blinked as if rousing from a reverie. I suppose I ought to go up to bed. She stood, and Darcy was on his feet just after her. Will you rest easily tonight? He asked. If you are asking whether I will experience another nightmare, she lifted her chin to look into his eyes. I hope not, but I cannot be sure. Well, what of some light amusement before you try to sleep? He heard himself offering. A book, perhaps, or what of a round of chess? We never did have that rematch. Oh no, both require more critical thinking than I'm capable of, I'm afraid. If I were to seek something to lighten my frame of mind, it would be something simpler, something more physical. Physical? He quirked a brow, both thrilling to and quailing from the shiver that rocked his inner being. Such as? She looked conscious, then utterly guilty, and confessed, well, the rumors are true. Occasionally I slip into the billiards room when I cannot sleep. My, he said, playing by yourself? Whatever are we to do with you, Elizabeth? Come, at least take on an opponent. Her teeth showed playfully. I caution you, sir, for you may not enjoy the match. Not enjoy it? He led her from the room, his hand unconsciously falling at her waist as he guided her to the door. How is that even possible? She turned her chin up to whisper mischievously into his ear. Because I cheat. Okay, so that is a bit of, and I have 10 more minutes. So what do you guys want? Do you want some more Tempted, or do you want?
Well, the comments so far are basically, where's the darn book? They want it now.
Any day now, like literally any day now. We're fine tuning the cover, and Janet Taylor is doing something absolutely stunning. I hesitate to say any more about it, but it's so gorgeous. She's going to say something pretty soon. So pretty much is basically sitting there about ready really soon. So
Is there any other questions out there in posting or jumping in?
I haven't actually been able to look at the comments here. So what's YouTube looking like?
Basically, it's just they're happy with both readings. They are enjoying them, and
Okay.
not many
Well,
questions about what was presented. What
Okay.
made you write a book around the turn of the century rather than the usual Regency period?
Well, it was the timing. I knew that this actually happened, that I'm not even sure why I knew it, but for the Boer War, this really was a thing where soldiers would come from England and buy US horses. They went to Australia, they went to lots of different places just to get horses to take for their soldiers. And I had always toyed with the idea, well, what if? So that's kind of where that came from. So it was just a matter of timing for the Boer War. And it's really, it's a similar period to the Regency in a lot of ways, but obviously it's a lot more modern. So I tried to reflect that with the language. It's more contraction use, there's a little bit less formality, but you're still at, it's kind of the golden age, you know?
Mhm.
Before World War I really changed the world's economy and the way social hierarchies worked. It's still kind of like the last gasp of all these wonderful things that we're so used to with Regency. So
There are also a lot of Americans who came over
yes.
to Britain. Mainly they had money. Elizabeth doesn't,
Yes.
apparently. But,
She doesn't know, but Sheila does. Sheila married the Earl of Matlock, or the future Earl of Matlock, because she brought a lot of money.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I have a short little funny romantic chapter to read. I could do that real quick, or we could talk about Tempted some more. Yes, very similar to Downton Abbey, Robin. Yeah. They were called Buccaneers, these women, and there's actually a movie about,
yeah.
yeah, very interesting group of people, I think. So.
Well, you've got 8 minutes, so.
I have a
whatever you can do.
chapter that takes about 8 minutes. So here we go. This is actually from Unintended, and this is the proposal scene. Dancing with Elizabeth Bennet was the most humbling experience of my life. No, I did not stumble, mistake the steps, or collide with her, but I did not acquit myself well. For one thing, I hardly spoke. When I did manage to dislodge a string of words from her mouth, I fear I gave offense, for my first instinct, which was only just and fair, I must say, was to defend myself when she challenged my honor. Fool, was I so ignorant and forgetful in her presence that I did not recall the first rule of engagement? The lady is always right. Except when she decides that George Wickham is a saint. It was entirely unintentional, but I may have insulted her intelligence. How could I help it when she insisted on pressing me after I tried to end a conversation that could lead nowhere pleasant? I did not mean to say that she lacked all reason, or that she was as bullheaded as she was beautiful. Yes, indeed, I said that verbatim. And that was how I ended up following her after our dance ended, and she stormed outside to the covered balcony, clearly intent on a bit of privacy. She whirled on me at once, trembling in wrath. How dare you, Mr. Darcy? What mean you by mocking me in public? And you have not even the decency to leave me alone. Mocking you? If anything, I have given you every reason to scorn me, I retorted. I cannot think what has come over me, save that you have rendered me nearly a speechless clown, incapable of a clear thought or word. She crossed her arms, and I wondered if she understood how tantalizingly her figure reformed itself when she stood thus. I cleared my throat and looked back at her face. Is this your means of an apology, sir? If so, it is a poor excuse for one. As I seldom need to apologize, I am not well practiced at the art. I sighed and tried to fix my eyes on the rain drizzling down off the overhanging roof. I meant every word I said, about the failings of Wickham's character, about the folly of believing him, and about your, I cleared my throat again, your rather remarkable person. She arched a brow. Thin words for a man who once declared me merely tolerable. I wonder, sir, if you mean to flatter me into a good opinion of you. I set my hands on my hips and drew closer to her, my face lowered near hers. And I wonder if you mean to persist in this resentment over one careless phrase. She tipped up her chin, her eyes flashing. You are a fine one to speak of implacable resentment. You who would destroy another man's chances on a jealous whim. His chances were destroyed by none but himself. I expect he's not told you of his ruinous inclinations or his habits of deceit. Her throat worked and she arched her shoulders back to face me more defiantly. He said you ignored your father's wishes. What sort of man could do that? What sort of man indeed? Did he tell you the conditions he did not satisfy, or were you so smitten by his charm that you did not bother to discover what he left unsaid? Fire surged into her countenance. Smitten? I am no mindless. I am afraid I committed a deed then that was as unintentional as it was memorable. Her lips had been so close and her manner so forward, all it took was a slight inhale, a gasp really, and I was kissing her, and she did not push me away. Instead, she bit me. Not instantly, no. Like an enchantress in her lair, she drew me in, her fine long neck curving and her jaw lifting the better to reach my mouth. I felt the soft flutter of her lashes against my cheek, the hesitant grazing of her fingers near my cravat, and my heart began to drift sweetly into this euphoric stupor. I even touched her shoulder and nearly drew her closer, just before the sharp injury to my lower lip recalled me to the present. We each lurched backward, both covering our mouths and panting. Those eyes that normally sparked with life and gaiety were now ablaze with something else entirely, and I was not persuaded that it was the righteous fury she tried to affect. Mr. Darcy, what is the meaning of this presumption? She cried. She tried to take a step back, but her heel caught in her gown and she faltered. I instinctively reached out to steady her, but after a slight hesitation, she waved my hand away. I was woefully lacking in proper air, stars dancing in my vision, but I tried to make an even reply. Forgive me, Miss Elizabeth. The offense was unintended. Yet you carried it off with determination once you had begun. I nodded and swallowed. I am afraid so. Then, sir, I must ask you, are you also the sort of man you would accuse Mr. Wickham of being? Do you take advantage of ladies with no thought of honor? Indeed not. I would be happy to trade my honor for your wounded dignity, madam. Shall I speak to your father this very evening? Her eyes narrowed. I am not so delicate or fearful as that. I would rather brush off your insult than consign myself to a lifetime of misery as your wife, if indeed your offer was even genuine, and of that I am doubtful. A lifetime of misery, so this is what you think of me. I think a great deal more of you, but that summary will do for the present. Good evening, Mr. Darcy. She brushed past me toward the door, thrust on the handle, and gave a great yank, but it did not budge. Nonplussed, she heaved a sharp breath and tried it again. Nothing happened. She did not turn to me, but she did cast her face upward and release a long sigh. Mr. Darcy, the door appears to be wedged. I stepped up grimly and tried the door myself. It is not wedged, it is locked. One of the footmen must have happened by. Her eyes widened in alarm. What are we to do? We cannot very well pound on the door to summon help. I will not be trapped into a compromise with you, sir. I scowled at her, and even then would have tried kissing her pouty, rosy lips if she had softened in the least. Mercifully, I think we can both be spared that fate. I will climb down from the balcony, and once I'm back inside, I will send your sister unlock the door. But that is impossible. Even if you should survive the climb down without a mishap, it is raining. You will look a fright when you come in, and then you will attract everyone's notice by speaking to Jane. Have you any objection to me risking my neck on the balcony if I manage to avoid creating a scene inside? She frowned. Mr. Bingley might protest if you break his trellis. I'm glad to hear of your concern, I answered dryly. I stepped up to the ledge and looked down. It was not far to the ground, no more than a good leg-breaking distance anyway. My neck and crown would probably be safe. I removed my gloves and passed them to her, then lifted my foot to straddle the stone wall. Mr. Darcy, do be careful, she cried out, suddenly reaching forward as if to stop me. Fear not, Miss Elizabeth. I doubt anyone would hold you culpable should I fall to my death. Her lips thinned. Because you think perhaps you think meanly of me, but I do not wish you harm, sir. Yet that is the way of things when we are in company, is it not? The worst is frequently bound to happen. I leaned my weight against the ledge, a tendril of mischief tugging at my soul that I was helpless to deny. And if things had gone differently a moment ago, Miss Elizabeth, I would beg your favors on behalf of my good fortune. Alas, they did not, so I am most likely doomed to a catastrophic fate. She set a hand on her hip, but something played at the corners of her mouth. You truly are an obstinate man, Mr. Darcy. Guilty as charged, Miss Elizabeth. Her eyes darkened and she felt a silent thought for nearly 3 seconds. Then, with abrupt decision, she swept forward and placed a firm kiss directly on my lips. Do not rip your breeches, she whispered. Okay, there we go. I think, did I hit the time? Oh, 1 minute to spare. Yay. So that's unintended.
You did
Jack,
great.
thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nicole. Those were delightful.
Thank you. I hope it was fun.
Yes, I mean, you've had a lot of nice compliments on both places, and I
Oh,
see
cool.
a couple of people suggesting that they'd love to see some more North and South from you.
Oh, I've thought about that. I don't know. I have to do that some more. I love John Thornton. Oh man, when I'm thinking about John Thornton, it's hard to get back to Darcy.
I can imagine that it
Oh.
would be hard to change there. But thank you very much for joining us. and
Thank
doing
you,
this.
Abigail.
It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, so how
And-
do I switch it off of my?
Okay, go over to the participants list.
Okay, hang on a second here. Oh, participants list. Okay.